Let's start with the big, very bad inflation numbers. Let's put the headline up on the screen here from Heather Long at the Washington Post, who does a good job just tracking the numbers. She says, just in, inflation is getting worse. Inflation rose 9.1% year over year in June. That is the highest since 1981, the year of my birth, and the highest so far in the pandemic period. Gas, rent, and food drove the increase. Gas accounted for about 50% of the increase. Inflation was up 1.3% just in the month of June alone. Let's go ahead and put some of the specifics here. This next tweet up on the screen about what categories we are seeing the highest inflation in. This again, Heather Long says inflation continues to hit hard. Groceries up 12% in the past year. That's the biggest annual increase since 1979. Chicken up 19% in the past year. That's the biggest increase ever. Gas up 60%, biggest since 1981. Electricity up 14%, biggest since 2006. Rent, this is a really critical one, up 5.8%, biggest since 1986. A little bit more on rent. Put the next one up. Over the past 3 months, rents have risen at an annual rate of 8.2%. Owner's equivalent rent rising at 7.3% rate. That's especially worrying because rents don't tend to turn around quickly. And the part that is probably the most crucial point here, let's put this A4 up on the screen. Bottom line, wages are up 5.1% in the past year. That sounds pretty good, but costs are up 9.1%. That means you are getting a massive pay cut. Gas prices have come down a little lately, she says, which will help, but food, rent, electricity are showing few signs of relief. We're going to get to the cope, the political cope from Biden and Pelosi in just a moment, but you know, there continues to be hope that, we're getting to the peak. Month after month after month, we hear these, we're at the worst of the crisis is behind us. But what's really troubling here is that even if you strip out the most volatile pieces, which are like food and gas prices, what they call core inflation is still rising at a rapid pace. That would seem to indicate that we are not moving past the end of this crisis. And listen, I think everyone should have a lot of humility about predicting exactly how and what happens here, but there is no sign at this point that, you know, the Fed's goal of reducing inflation is working. The Fed's goal of hurting you is working, but the Fed's goal of reducing inflation through the actions that they're taking, thus far, we're not seeing it in the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any getting around it. And any of the structural issues that are affecting inflation are not being solved. So gas,
That's
I mean,
right.
you know, people are saying, the administration we're about to get to is like championing the fact that gas is only $4.60 a gallon. It's actually still near $5 here in DC. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to say 30 cents a gallon reduction isn't a good thing, but that doesn't mean that it's still good. I mean, by the time, before Russia invaded Ukraine, I think it was $3.50 a gallon. That was already high, and a lot of people were complaining. So around the twos is where people feel comfortable as a consumer. So look, you're still over 100% on that. On food, I mean, the food price problem continues to skyrocket. Also, the fertilizer issues and natural gas and more that we've been talking about, none of that is going away. And not just right now, for years and years, because crop planning and others that people, farmers and others need to do in Europe and in the United States, all of those problems remain. On top of the supply chain issues, I mean, the Port of Los Angeles continues to be a nightmare. It's not as bad as it was a year ago, but it's still not even close to 2019. And then you add on top of that the recessionary problems that we already have in the economy where people just don't want to spend as much money. So you have a reduction in demand, you have the supply chain problems, and then you have the gas issue on top of the geopolitical risk situation. All of that just means that it's just not going to go away anytime soon. In addition to fuel oil is probably the highest part of all of inflation that people are seeing at home. As I've talked about here ad nauseum, the energy crisis that we're all experiencing is going to continue. And as the country gets colder into the winter, that's actually when I think we'll probably see some of the worst energy inflation. So gas may come down to $4 something a gallon just because of reduction in demand. But electricity prices are going to probably just replace and eat even more of people's income. So it's rough out there if you're a consumer.
It absolutely is. I read the New York Times analysis of these inflation numbers and what they mean and what might happen in the future. consumer and their quote unquote like silver lining or like hope of what might happen. They say there are some reasons that today's rapid price gains could abate based on the economy's fundamentals. For example, consumers might struggle to sustain their spending as prices jump. And if they move in with roommates, stop taking vacations, or pull back on social activities to save money, supply could begin to catch up with demand, allowing price gains to decelerate. So they're hoping that people are hurting so badly that they're having to move in with roommates, cancel their social activities, cancel their vacations, stop driving. I mean, that is the economic policy of this administration, and this is what the Republicans are offering as well. They have no actual solutions that would deal with the corporate price gouging, the supply chain issues, nothing that's going to get through Congress. The only thing that they can do is crush demand, and so that's what they're actually hoping for. I mean, how absolutely grim is that? They are hoping that the American consumer is so badly hit that they have to pull back on their car trips, their road trips, their vacation, their spending, their meals out, their, moving in with roommates, all of these things. It's just incredibly ugly that this is what our policymakers have resorted to.
Housing is the one I'm probably the most worried about because you already pointed out 8% on a national average. Okay, that's national, but if we're talking metro areas, so there's actually a story that just broke this morning. Manhattan rent has broken $5,000 for the first time in New York City history. $5,000 for the average rent in the city.
So insane.
On Manhattan Island. Okay, yeah, you can live in Brooklyn, or is it going to be that much better in Queens and elsewhere? That stuff bleeds out because what happens is, of course, the ultra rich are not affected by this. And even the upper middle class broadly can afford it. I'm talking about this in my monologue. Only 17% of white college educated voters say that the economy or inflation is their top issue in 2022. The fact is they can just absorb it, but everybody else has to deal with it. And so the trickle down effect of squeezing upper class and upper middle class people out of the housing market is just going to balloon the rent market even more, which is just going to force even more working class people, even middle class people, honestly, out into the real dregs of housing. So people are going to have to drive more, which means they're going to have to spend more gas, live in subpar conditions. 30, 35-year-olds living with roommates. I mean, this is not the way the country was designed to work. But effectively, that's the policy right now of the Federal Reserve, is to push things in that direction.
And we are covering for either this weekend or for next week a story about how many people are pulling out of their contracts when they're buying a home. They put the house under contract, and then 15% are now walking away and say, we can't do this anymore because of inflation, because of the way the prices have escalated, and specifically because of the way that mortgage rates have dramatically spiked. I mean, a huge historic spike in mortgage rates, which again, that's the intent. But the place, so you're not seeing the results of the Fed policy in terms of inflation coming down, but you are seeing the Fed policy in terms of regular consumers, Americans being hurt and, increasingly struggling to be able to sort of move forward with their lives, and especially things like being able to get into a house, which, as you said, that has a trickle-down effect in terms of, okay, if that person's not buying a house, then they're in the rental market, then someone who was already in the rental market who was sort of struggling to hang on there gets pushed down into homelessness. It's a really, really bad downward spiral. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.